Another minute to go, then we'll start. Very good evening, friends. I'm Sujata Shankar, convener of INTACH Chennai chapter. I'm indeed very happy to extend a warm welcome to each of you who's joined us today. Today are members of INTACH and friends. A very special welcome to our two speakers today, Ms. Judith Watson, who's joined us all the way from Glasgow, and Dr. Sulochana Nalapat Unnikrishnan, who has joined us from Kerala. Ms. Judith Watson shares her grandmother's memoirs from a diary she meticulously kept during her husband's working life in the tea estates of South India. Dr. Sulochana Nalapat Unnikrishnan, a medical professional, will share her experiences of life on the estates. And no small thanks to technology that has enabled this meeting of minds across continents. Since the lockdown for about over a year now, we've been holding our talks online. And today we are honored to have both Judith from Scotland and Dr. Unnikrishnan from Cochin. Just a brief introduction to Intacc to those who may not be familiar. Intacc is an acronym for the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage. Intacc is a non-profit organization that was set up 37 years ago in 1984. Its vision is to spearhead heritage awareness. Arya, can you please mute the others? Intacc is a non-profit organization that was set up 37 years ago in 1984. Its vision to spearhead heritage awareness and conservation in India and to protect India's vast unprotected heritage. With the passion of members who are all volunteers, Intacc is today recognized as the largest heritage organization in India with over 200 chapters across the country. At Chennai chapter, we have, through programs like today and in other initiatives, been creating awareness about the significance of our heritage. Our programs are announced on Instagram and on the Facebook page of Intacch Chennai chapter. And programs of the recent past are on the Intacc YouTube channel, as will be today's talk as well. If any of you would like to be on our mailing list or become members of Intacc, please send a mail to intachchennai@gmail.com. That's intachchennai@gmail.com. The mention of tea estates conjures up images of rolling hill slopes clothed in vast expanses of green, shrouded in mist. The lives of people in the estates over the decades, the flora and fauna, the social and other aspects encompass many facets of our heritage: cultural heritage, built heritage, natural heritage, and intangible heritage. We eagerly look forward to both Ms. Judith Watson's narrative of her grandma's jottings of the early 20th century and Dr. Unnikrishnan's own take on life on the plantations a few decades later. May I request Shama Prasanna, one of our Intacc members, to formally introduce Ms. Judith Watson first, and after her presentation, Dr. Sulochana Unnikrishnan, who will speak thereafter.
Thank you, Sujata. A very good evening to one and all out here present today. It's my pleasant duty to introduce the two speakers today, the distinguished speakers today. I will start with Judith Watson. She's the granddaughter of Margaret Emily Cantley and was born at the Mission Hospital in Madurai in 1941 and baptized in the CSI Mount Church at Vandiperiyar. In 1946, her family moved from Kerala to Dollar, a small village in Scotland. In 1959, Judy moved to London to train at Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital and later as a generic social worker with Camden Council. She graduated from Glasgow University in 1985 and she currently stays there only at Glasgow. So, well, her grandmother wrote a memoir in a diary she kept during her 40 years in India. Initially in longhand, then typed up sometime after she moved to Scotland in 1948. The manuscript then lay forgotten for many years until Judith rediscovered it, and she now will share her remarkable story from a bygone era. The talk will follow her grandmother's life on and around the tea estates of Kerala, mapping challenges posed by the climate, disease, and wild animals, as well as her deep affection for the Indian estate workers and those she treated in her dispensaries. For your information, this memoir is due to be published later this year. We are really very eager to listen to you, Judy. The floor is all yours. Over to you.
Thank you so much for your introduction, Shujaata. It's such a pleasure and a privilege to be here to talk to you and everybody about my grandmother's life in India on the estates. Her story may not be unique, but in my searches, I haven't found a similar story. Mainly the stories from women in India at that time were the wives of military and the civil servants. And they only give a very scant coverage of unconventional women in India at the time on the estates. Women who go beyond the constraints of their time, the resilience, the resourcefulness, and all the other things that she talks about in her book. So I would just like to share with you a definition that I found in my searches. It's a definition of heritage that I found. And I thought this was so apposite for my grandmother's talk that I'd like to share it with you. So I'll read it. It's a universal process by which humans assert and maintain connections with our past, assert our similarities and differences from one another, tell our children what we think is important, and it deserves to be part of the future. So I'd like to start my slideshow, if I may. I don't have the slideshow. Ah, lovely. As it was described in the introduction, this is my grandmother, Monica, sorry, that's my mother's name, Margaret Emily Cantley. She was Madge to her friends, but to her grandchildren, she was Oma. And I'm not able to move the slides along. Could I have control over the slides, please?
Judy, could you please accept my request for you to control the screen?
Yes, no, it's... I'm still not able to move it on. There we go. That's the next one. It was just very slow. So this is the typewriter that my grandmother wrote her memoirs from her diary that she kept while she was in India. And it's a very old typewriter, and she brought it back to Scotland and always kept it in this basket. So it was a great family treasure for us. Now it belongs to my grandson. Could I have the next slide? Yes. So what I wanted to show you was that when I actually found the text that she had written to be published, I received it in screeds of paper. I think there were about 130,000 words, and we edited it down to 92,000, just over, but always very, very careful to tell her story in her voice. Next slide, please. So before I begin her story, I just wanted to put it in context of the estates where they lived. And so we have the first stage of her life in India was living with her parents in estates around Muna, Suryavelli and Palivasal. Now, I only say that they are these estates because I found them on the back of photographs. In fact, she was very reluctant to tell us in the text exactly where she was at the beginning of her stay. And it was a bit like a puzzle, and she gave us clues, and then you had to work out where they were. So I worked out that it was Suryavelli and Palivasal. The next stage of her life, her married life, was in Pamba, Thenga, and Munjamule. These are all estates in Vandipariar, and they're now part of the Boab group. And the last stage of her life in India was at Cloudland, High Wavies, around Muna, which is part of the Wood Briar group. And then lastly, Cardana, which was a small cardamom plantation that my grandfather bought with a friend. And I haven't been able to find it on the map, but it was definitely near to Cloudland and High Wavies because they made regular trips there. So next slide, please. So this is just a little map that was drawn. It really is for the book that illustrates where the estates were. So we don't have Muna, unfortunately, up here, but it's just where the cursor is. And then we have Thenga and Pamba, where she first went. And then I think it was Thenga, and Munjamale is just outside Vandipariar. And up here we have Cloudland and High Wavies. I had to put in the Surili Falls because this was a very important place for my grandmother. She called it the holiest of holies, and she went up there on her own very often to reflect and to think about things. But she tells a story of actually climbing up from the bottom to the top, and then from the top down to the bottom with her son. And she claims that she's, at that time, the only person ever to have done this, but she did love it so much. And she describes the tradition of celebrating this Surili Falls. It's a mystical place. And every year there was a festival where everybody would congregate and have a feast and have a lovely time. So could we have the next slide, please? So when my grandmother was born in Ceylon, and after 6 years, she was taken to Scotland to be educated and looked after by two elderly aunts. She does tell us that she didn't really learn very much. She had books read to her, but she really always regretted her lack of education. And this is my grandmother here. And I don't know who the other children have their names down here, but I don't recognize them. So that is my grandmother. Can I have next slide, please? Thank you. So Madge, when she's 16, my grandmother, when she's 16, she returns to her parents who are now in Tamil Nadu. They've moved from Ceylon. She's 16 years old and she makes this incredible journey. And she describes an eventful journey from the boat, which in those days was the Bibi line. It came from Britain to Colombo, where her father met her. And then began this terrifying journey that she describes by ferry steamer to Tuticorin, and then by bullock cart through 2 raging rivers, up a 7,000-foot mountain, train journeys, but all, and I checked the distance between Tuticorin and Muna, and I think it comes to about 293 miles, which now takes 6 hours. You have to correct me on that one, but I'm sure it took many, many days. She painted a vivid description of the journey, incredible detail and remarkable for a 16-year-old, I think. Firstly, to have made the journey on her own from Britain without a companion, and then to have made this long, long journey with her father. Next slide, please. So now she starts life with her parents. She absolutely loves being back in India, and the treks that she makes with her father through the jungle and the tea fields absolutely delight her. She's enthralled by the wildlife and all her acute observations of animals and plants. In fact, you could actually write a book about this part of the text because there's so much description, wonderful description. And what could I have the last slide, please? Yes, thank you. So at this time, electricity was introduced to the factory in the area. And I'll read you just a little bit about it because I'm sure it's quite a historical opening, I realized when I did some research. So what she says is, as ill luck would have it, in the afternoon of the opening, it was overcast with thunder grumbling in the distance and heaviness in the air. Outside, the storm continued to rage, and before the final speech, a man came running in to say that the fittest pony, tied under a nearby tree, had been struck by lightning and killed. But eventually the ceremony proceeded without a hitch and the lights were duly switched on. But next morning, 3 children went missing. There had been murmurings amongst the Indians that electricity and the machinery would not be able to work, and it would only be at the cost of human sacrifice. And she says, and I think she reflects on this, even though she was so young. She reflects that it's amazing how little the labor was considered in those days. And because the estate managers knew so little about them, I doubt whether anybody realized the extent and depth of their ingrained beliefs. So the factory was completed, the electricity turned on, and the 3 children were found. In fact, they'd been taken away to protect them. So that was all worked out well. So the next thing that happened in the area was the consecration of the new church, which I assume, she doesn't actually give a name to it, but I assume it was in Muna, because that would have been their local church. There's a wonderful description of the Bishop of Travancore coming up to bless the church. And at that time, when the church was blessed, people would bring money, but obviously they didn't have any money. So they brought livestock and vegetables and plants. Of course, the bishop couldn't take them anywhere with him. So they were all auctioned off. And apparently the richer members of the congregation paid a lot of money for the animals. And then all the money was given to the people in the district who needed it. So could we have the next slide, please? So this is my grandmother's wedding. So after a little while with her parents, I think it was a couple of years, she met the manager of a local tea plantation, James Cantley. And after seeing each other several times, they fell in love and got married. She got married in Muna Church, and apparently they were the first couple to be married in this new church. She wanted, in her usual unconventional way, she wanted to arrive at the church on a horse in riding habit. But as you can see, she must have been persuaded otherwise because she arrived in this beautiful white dress. So this is my grandmother and my grandfather and their sister Kathleen. I don't know who these other people are. They probably friends and relations. So after my mother got married, she moved into my grandfather's estate at Pamba in Vanderperia. And she was a young bride, and she had to learn a lot and to be able to run the house and manage things. But she set up a dispensary. She started a creche. With very, very few medications. They would have aspirin and quinine. That's probably all they had. She was, by this time, she was speaking Tamil. So she was able to talk to people in the household quite easily. She had a lot of burns to treat, and she really didn't like doing this because she found it very difficult. But she devised a way of creating dressings that didn't stick and hurt her patients. She warmed up castor oil and Vaseline and dipped pieces of gauze in, and then put those on the wound, on the burn. And apparently that made a big difference. And after a year, her son Bill was born. A difficult birth in as much as she had a bad fall beforehand, and he was born prematurely. And after a little while, I think he was 5 months old, when one of the people in the house who was working for my grandmother, it was found that she had a couple in her house who had smallpox. So this was a great crisis for them, and the whole family had to go very fast to Bangalore to be vaccinated. So could we have the next slide, please? Okay, this is the photograph that I had with the Palivasal on it. So I assume that this is, and it said just after the wedding. So my grandmother, my grandfather, Sister Kathleen, and their parents, Alice and George Bewley. Okay, next slide, please. So during the war, my grandmother spent the time in Britain. My grandfather was posted to what was then Mesopotamia and to France. And she doesn't talk much about that time. When they come back, there's a they find that the estates are in a really neglected state, and a lot of work has to be done. Also, food reserves are running low. And so there wasn't enough to feed the workers. The workers' weekly measure in those days was measured in minglis, which is equivalent to about 2 pounds of rice a week, and this was not sufficient. So my grandfather met with Kanganese, and the proposal was that they would flick off the surface of the rice to feed the sick and those who were unable to work. This worked, and eventually it was a great relief for the workers, and eventually the company agreed to provide more rice and also some meat, because so many of the workers were unable to work and dying. Next slide, please. So this is the Cloudland Bungalow where they lived, and I don't know, but I think that might be their bungalow up in the hill there, and there is another building behind here. But you can see that how much land is still covered in trees and has to be cleared for the tea to be planted. And in the foreground here is the preparation for the tea fields. Okay, next one, please. So after the war, there had been obviously on the other estates, there had been malaria, and both my grandparents had been infected and very sick from time to time. But this really was their first experience of malaria as a killer. Workers and babies were dying in the lines, and medical supplies were limited. And I'll just read this piece from the text, the company was losing enormous sums of money, not only through losses in tea crops, but also in the loss of money advanced to the coolies. At the time, it was customary for new labourers to be advanced a sum of money, partly to pay off their debts and partly to send home to support the families they had left behind. Then that was deducted and repaid from their earnings, which, being low, took a long time. However, if they were laid low or died from malaria, it was never recovered. In a bad year, the company could lose as much as £2,000. So what the company did was they asked a malarial expert to come and advise my grandparents on the estate to see if they could limit the amount of infections and illness. There's a lot of information in this part of the text about malaria and the Plasmodium parasite and how it's passed on. So I'm not going to talk a lot about that. But what my grandmother did was she set up a laboratory in her bungalow. She managed to source microscopes from the local hospital and learnt how to take blood smears and identify the parasite in the blood. So I'm not going to talk any more about that at the moment. But the main thing about the situation they were in was that they had to cover all open wells and any water that wasn't covered. So they set about covering the water, or the well was covered, but the well for the higher caste workers had to be covered with a gauze and another cover on top. But for everybody else, they built a hydro dam. Now, if I could have the next slide, please. So they built a hydro dam, with which they were able to pipe water to the huts, to the workers' huts, a hydraulic pump. And then the next stage was to make sure all the water was oiled, and small teams of Indians whose job it was to spray oil on every drop of water within half a mile of any dwellings every 10 days. The team worked continuously and as often as possible with every yard of oiling. And my grandmother joined in the oiling and did a lot of work to make sure that no larvae were in the water anywhere on the estate. So could we have the next one, please? So in 1924, the southwest monsoon brought torrential rains. From my research, I read about this, and it seems to be something that has survived in history and is well written about. But my grandmother wrote a little bit about it in her memoir, and she says that the Periyar River had surged through the factory's lower story, leaving heaps of silt in its wake. News began to arrive from estates further up the valley that the landslides had destroyed sections of the road. Given that it was our main access to both the plains and the railway, gangs of coolies were dispatched to assess and repair the damage. So water surged through the factory, destroying much of the machinery. And roads became impassable. Workers' settlements were washed away without trace. And it left a lot of work to be done afterwards. She says, sorry, I've lost it a bit. It soon became apparent that it would take weeks of work and thousands of workers to make sure the path fit to carry wheeled traffic or even bullock carts. And on the 9th of July, 9 inches of rain fell in 24 hours. And the world's highest rainfall was recorded, 60 inches in 48 hours. Next slide, please. I did want to include some photographs of the children on the estate. My grandmother by this time had acquired a little camera, and she took many, many photographs. Unfortunately, there's some beautiful photographs of the workers and their children and the staff on the estate, but they aren't named. But this one was of a group of children waiting to receive their Christmas presents. And next slide, please. And this one was a great aid to my grandmother Ratnam, and she became great friends all the time she was in there. She was wonderful with the children in the creche, and helped my grandmother in other ways too. She helped her in the dispensaries that she ran. Next slide, please. So in High Wavies in 1937, my grandfather started building a new factory, or having it built. There were no contractors at the time, so my grandfather had to do this part of the work himself. Wood was collected from the jungle nearby and used on the exterior and the interior of the building, but everything else had to be carried from the plains. It took 50 men to carry the stones and 70 to carry the bed plates up from the foot of the hill to the factory. But it also meant that last in the bungalow, they had electric light. And after the factory was built, there were huge celebrations and wonderful descriptions of piles and piles of rice and 2 goats, and everybody was invited, all the children, all the workers and staff. So that was a very successful enterprise. And also my grandfather went on to build an arts and crafts school for the children. The girls learned how to sew and knit and make clothes, and the boys were given carpentry classes. Next slide, please. So this is the cutting for stone for the factory. And the next slide is a slide of the workers pulling the stones up from the plains to the factory. This was a really useful time for my grandparents. They were at a stage where there wasn't a lot of malaria on the estate, so they had time to do other things. They traveled quite a lot at this time. They see the Taj Mahal. They visited Kathleen, my grandmother's sister, in Bihar, and many other places they went to. And at that time, my grandmother discovered Ayurvedic medicine when some of her own treatments didn't work, and the people that she was treating were very keen to try other things, and she embraced this and found that it was very useful. She started a ladies' club. They had no European visitors where they were, because it was so remote that nobody wanted to visit them. So she was very keen to socialize. And they had a ladies' club where staff wives and wives from the village would come and meet. Originally, it was meant to be about conversation, but then it developed into teaching them to knit and to use sewing machines, and also they exchange recipes and cooking tips. So this is, if we could go on, this is the construction of the factory. Next one. And this is the High Wavies bungalow. And as you can see, it's very remote, and here they're beginning to plant and clear as well. So there was a lot of clearing and work to be done on the plantations to prepare them for successful planting and tea crops. Next slide, please. By now it was 1942 and wartime rationing was introduced. There was very little rice available at the time. And so my grandparents had to introduce pulses instead of rice, which was not really acceptable at all. Then when the pulses ran out, they introduced wheat, which
I think we have lost Judy right now. Her connection seems to have gone off. We'll just wait for a few minutes for her to rejoin. Kindly bear with us. I really don't know. We're trying to find out what has happened, why the connection might have got lost. Sujata, may I request you to just check with Judy?
Hello all, I just called Judy. She's coming back into the meeting. She lost connectivity in between. Apologies for that.
If anyone would like to ask any questions, you can just put it in the chat box so that after the speakers are done, we can share, we can check it out with the speakers. We'll probably have the question and answer session after both the speakers, so that we do not delay any time. Do put it in the chat box. We'd love to have your feedback too. We have got her back. I think, Judy, you're muted. You'll have to unmute yourself.
I'm so sorry about that loss of connection.
No.
Shall I start again?
Please, we're happy to have you back with us again.
I'm so sorry. So, so at this time it's 1942 and we have wartime rationing. There's very little rice available, as I said, and they introduced pulses. But when the pulses ran out, they managed to source some wheat, which, although it was very expensive, they managed to get hold of some. But unfortunately, it was not at all easily to digest. And so my grandfather bought a mill and started grinding it and making porridge and bread. And then when that ran out, they introduced maize. And when that ran out, they had rye. So my grandmother, in her resourceful and unconventional way, wrote to the Agricultural College in Coimbatore for advice about perhaps using edible jungle plants or even nettles, which they'd used in Scotland. But she was told very clearly that was not acceptable at all. Next slide, please. So although my grandmother was very friendly with all the estate workers and people in the village, she also met, in her travels, she met the hill tribes, the Uralis, the Pandarams and the Manans, who lived in the Periyar Valley along the banks of the Periyar River and dam. They met them several times on their treks and they became firm friends. And I'll just read out this quickly to you. Every Urali settlement is a treehouse to which a woman is taken when she goes into labor and where she stays all alone without any contact with other villagers until 3 days after her child is born. I never discovered how many women and babies died, either at childbirth or as a result of having no assistance during a difficult labor. So the Uralis lived in tree huts during the night, and during the day they were on the ground. And she says that all of the tribes had severe hookworm and malaria and were very, very unwell most of the time. The children, she said, were thin and lustrous with protuberant bellies. But there was very little interaction between the Uralis, the Pandarams and the Manans because they all felt that they were different castes. Next slide, please. So I didn't want to have a talk without talking about some of the caste and superstition on the estates. I wanted to include how caste and superstition affected acceptance of change and how important it was for my grandparents to be sensitive to cultural differences. There are many different religions and beliefs on the estate, which at times caused friction, but my grandmother, in her quiet and non-judgmental way, usually managed to diffuse the situation with respect and humor. However, she insisted that any group she ran left caste at the door and was never taken into meetings or the creche or any other situation. However, sometimes caste created very sad situations. She describes one very sad case when one of the overseers walks into my grandfather's office and tells him that he has just shot his sister and his brother-in-law. And it turned out that his sister was pregnant with a child, and he couldn't bear for her to bring a child into the world who was of a lower caste. And that seemed to be very, very sad for my grandmother. And she found that very difficult, those sort of things very difficult. On a lighter note, when she was entertaining at High Wavies, as I said, they didn't have very many people come and visit. And she talks of having people to eat with her. And it was, some would only accept fruit with unbroken skins, would only take milk from our cows if collected in their own pots by either themselves or their servants. Some would accept food from us, but had to cook it themselves on a bonfire in the bedroom. Others would eat food cooked by porges, but only on the assurance that it was strictly vegetarian, while Muslims who generally ate anything insisted that meat was slaughtered in accordance to their religion. So you can see that their meal times were highly entertaining and very difficult to provide the sort of food that people wanted. But my grandmother loved it all, and she just adapted to and respected people's wishes and enjoyed their company tremendously. I think we're a bit low on time, so I'm going to be really quick with the next section. The last thing that she came across, she talks about gratitude and the difference between cultures in gratitude. And she writes, to Indians, a visit from a beggar is considered lucky since it provides an opportunity to practice charity. Westerners are apt to judge Indians as ungrateful without realizing the subtle difference between their perception of gratitude and ours. For them, good deeds are done to please God or to acquire merit, and thus the donor is more likely to be grateful to the recipient as opposed to the other way around, for giving them the opportunity to do good. I've lived long enough in the East to become accustomed to that point of view, and in many ways prefer it. She talks about Muniandi's spirit, which affected the building of some places for the workers to live, and it was in the wrong place, and it was facing the hill, which is an evil spirit, Muniandi, and they had to block up all the windows so that the workers couldn't look out onto the hillside, and Muniandi couldn't affect them in the building. Could I have the next slide, please? Because the Labour had such a bad time just after the war, and my grandparents really wanted to thank them and show how much they appreciated their patience, both during the famine and in other situations. So they bought a slide projector and they rented films from Madura Film Library, and every week they showed films in the factory, and it made everybody really, really happy, and they would queue for about 2 hours before the film was due to start, and their favorite films were Charlie Chaplin and Rin Tin Tin. And that was such a lovely thing to do, I think, to respect them and to want to thank them so heartily for all that they've done and put up with. Go to the next slide, please. So coming to beginning of the riots and leading up to partition, and my grandparents witnessing and hearing about riots in Madura and the cities, and they realized that they're going to have to leave India very soon, and they're very upset about this. But I'd just like to read out the last paragraph of her book, and she says, this is me writing about her at the moment. Constant in her writing is a deeply felt connection with the people, wildlife and landscapes of Kerala. She never lost her sense of joy and wonderment, even years later, she reminisced. I often revisit India during sleepless nights when with plenty of time, I can relive moments of joy through treasured memories. The sounds of the jungle, amassed over 40 years, are likewise packed into my memory, ready to come to the call of this luckiest of women. Next slide, please. And my grandmother, when she left, was presented with this tribute from the workers of the High Wavies estate. Probably can't read it, but it's beautifully presented and in a frame with a metal background so that it's damp proof, and we've kept this, and it's a wonderful treasure to have. I think that's the end. I'll end there. And
Wow, I think this has been quite an interesting session. You've brought alive, I think, the life in the tea estates and how it used to be, really taken us down a trip through a bygone era. Just practically, we could all feel that we were part and parcel of how life was out there. Quite amazing. And the beautiful pictures. I mean, it was, if your grandmother had purchased the camera and taken such beautiful photographs, it's a treat to us to see all these pictures and actually bring it to life as to what exactly an actual life would have been in these tea estates. That was really, really fascinating. Thank you so much, Judy. I think there are a lot of wonderful comments that are there in the chat box also, which you can also read it up, but we are going to have a little bit of question answer session, which I'm sure a lot of people would like to ask you some questions or at least relive their memories also, which we will do after the second speaker.
yes,
So that we can have a proper Q&A session or the interaction session rather, I should say, after both the speakers are done. Thank you so much, Judy, for bringing alive a wonderful memoir. We look forward to seeing the book being published soon and read more about it through there. Thank you so much, Judy. So without further ado, I would like to go on to introducing our second speaker for the day, Dr. Sulochana Nalapattu Unnikrishnan. Dr. Sulochana was born in December 1940. She graduated from Calicut Medical College, and her husband Unnikrishnan Nair worked on one of the Munnar tea estates. What we've been hearing so much about the Munnar tea estates, he also was there. The tea estates of James Finlay and Co., which later became Tata Finlay, and subsequently, of course, Tata Tea, as we all know it as. She served on the estates as manager, community development, and social welfare department, and for a few years also worked with United Planters Association in their comprehensive labor welfare scheme, initially as the medical officer and then as medical advisor. After their retirement from the head office in Calcutta or Kolkata, they settled in Kochi, Kerala. She has written 10 or 12 books in Malayalam and has also compiled and edited the poems of her mother, Nalapat Balamani Amma. In English, she has done a coffee table book called The Story of Munnar, which sounds very interesting, which is out of print at this point of time, unfortunately. She has written her mother's monograph in Malayalam and English for the Sahitya Academy. She has also written a very personal book, Kamla, My Sister, which will soon be published. We look forward to hearing your life in the tea estates, Dr. Sulochana. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Lovely to see all of you. Judy said there's nothing unique about it. But I disagree with her. This grandmother and granddaughter are certainly unique. I don't want to. So big salams to both of them. For the grandmother who went through terrible things in that, because I must have gone to those plantations, say, after 50, 60 years after her grandmother's time. And our life was slightly better, thanks to people like her grandmother. Then, and she has dedicated a book to the Dravidians of tea gardens of South India. I love that. A special thanks for that. I too am one of them, one of the Dravidians. Thanks a lot. Sorry, something went wrong suddenly. From the narrative, after reading the narrative of a grandmother, I did a WhatsApp call to Judith. And then from her, I came to know that the grandmother had got married in Munnar CSI church. And I see that he didn't work for Finlay. It says Palivasal and what is the other place? Okay, Surinelli. Surinelli, actually, it was a Malayalam plantation estate. Surinelli, Lockhart, and Palivasal was always with Finlays, I think. So I was under the impression that, but then this CSI church, whether Palivasal or Sukanad or, everybody gets married there and goes for services and all that. And that was built in 1910, the CSI church in Munnar. And I was told that these Margaret and James got married in that church. So I was very excited with all this information. So I called someone in Munnar, a friend of mine in Munnar, and told him to go there and see the records and see the names of these two people, James Cantley and Margaret Dooley. Then as far as I'm concerned, as was already explained, I studied in Calicut Medical College. After MBBS, I did my house agency there and got married to this planter called Unnikrishnan Nair from Calicut only. And I went up there with him. But I come from a very Gandhian family, the parents. So no drinking and dancing. And there was a cultural problem for me when I went there initially. And I hadn't seen a drink in my life when I got there. I was 24, I suppose, at that time, 24 or 25. And then I was so upset over all these things and ultimately, all the corners were taken off. Munnar took off my corners, these plantations, And ultimately, I realized that it doesn't really matter what a person is holding in the glass that he is holding, whether it is Coca-Cola or whiskey. What matters is the man who is holding it, what kind of a person he is. And so I only used to say that initially you were terrible, but then you became a better person to live with. That Unni is my husband. So that was Munna to me initially. But now I love that place. It is my home. My home is not in Calicut or Ernakulam, and as far as I'm concerned, Munnar is my home. Then, for our wedding, Unni's manager was someone called John Goldsberry, and wife was Elspeth. John is a Briton, and Elspeth is a Scot. So they came for our wedding to Calicut. And she was sitting next to me the previous night when we were having dinner. And Elspeth asked me about my wedding. So I said, it's an arranged marriage. She was so upset. She said, she can't think of an arranged marriage without falling in love with somebody to marry. How is it possible? She was very unhappy about it. And then she kept looking at Unni, who was also there. And then she's telling me, he may be a little short, but he has a nice smile, doesn't he? So I said, yeah, very nice smile. So we were okay with each other. And we adjusted to wherever Unni was. We adjusted and we were quite happy. Then, I was talking, this is about the cultural difference I'm talking. Now, another thing was, I didn't go for any further studies because it was not, we could not have done that. Staying there with Unni, I didn't want to leave him and go somewhere and study and all that. So I didn't do that. And I have worked as medical officers in some of the hospitals. And then on the deputation, I worked for Upasi, as these people are saying. They had a CLWS program. Actually, I would say Upasi widened my horizons. Upasi. More into this welfare thing and all that, and community development, public health thing. So they brought me into, they had a scheme called Comprehensive Labor Welfare Scheme. And I also came to understand a little bit of labor economics in tea. All the managements recognize direct relation between plant nutrition and productivity, don't they? But not the other half, the worker. The worker, his aspirations, his worries, he comes, you can't just get his, you cannot just hire two hands. The man comes with those hands and he has his own aspirations. He has his own family problems. So those things have to be addressed to increase your productivity. That is the angle that I got after working with Upasi. Prime object of a company is to produce tea. That is another thing. See, I went for this is after so many years after I retired, and then to my village home in Pune, when I was called for a meeting sort of thing. The medical students of 4th year and final year had come. About 70 of them that day. So I was sitting there watching them coming in and then sitting and chatting and all that. Then I was thinking of my 1957 class. We were 100 students in that class, out of which 23 only were girls. At present, I understand that in Calicut Medical College and all that, 53% are girls and only remaining are boys. So that's the change that has happened during. And so in the Punirkulam seminar, I suddenly thought of this class, and then we all passed out together. The same teachers taught us, same college. And then at the end of it all, it's like dispersal of seeds to learn, we were in the science classes. So like that, all of us went and we were deposited in different places. Everybody didn't go get into a proper hospital. Everybody didn't go to, or some of them went to some small village where the whole picture was different. And so that, like that, all 100 of us, then some people went to US and Britain and Dublin and all that to study further, and they became surgeons and gynecologists and all that. So that is the dispersal. Since because of the dispersal, even though we all learn the same thing, the seeds are found in different places, and then we had to contend with whatever is available there. Whatever is available there, we had to make use of. You see the point? So then that is why I am talking about Upasi. Anyway, as soon as I got to Munnar initially, first I'm saying, and one person who was our Dr. Mahadevan, Dr. R. Mahadevan. He's from Chennai. He was in Stanley Medical College as well as MMC. And after retiring from both the places, he must have been 70 when he joined the company as a CMO, Chief Medical Officer. So I gave this thing, I wanted a job there. He called me into his room and then he said, I showed my certificate and all that. And he said, I don't want to see all these things. He said, he's not interested. And he said, I'll never forget that. Do not grow roots in your hospital. Do not grow roots. You finish your OP, take off your white jacket and put it around the back of the chair and then get out in peace. Because people do not fall sick in your hospital. People do not fall sick in your hospital. They fall sick at home. So you get out of the hospital, go to that place and then find out why they are falling sick. The homes, the drains there, and then water supply there, and then what you do. At 10 o'clock, 10:30, you finish your OP, you shouldn't be sitting in the hospital. That is the best advice I've heard, and it's most unexpected it was when I heard that. And this is how we were trained by Dr. Mahadevan. And those days, now, if you have to put in a loop, a property, they say you need the certificate, GGO or MD in gynecology. But we were all trained by Dr. Mahadevan to do everything. Because India is a place where you don't have specialists in every little village. One hospital will be there, one or two. So if they're not, and distances are there, it is not possible to have this kind of rules. So he trained us to do everything, Dr. Mahadevan. And I don't know how exactly he did it, I do not know. But he selected 5-6 hospitals. And the DMO of the district came and visited the hospitals. And he must have said, it is this thing, I'll be in charge. And I'm responsible for these people. And he trained us to 5 hospitals, 6 hospitals were selected, and all the instruments were supplied there. And he would send his assistants. When Dr. Balraman was there from Vellore, Tambilare, and his wife Lillian was there. She was a gynecologist. Balraman was a surgeon. So there is a central hospital had all this: physician, surgeon, gynecologist, and all that. But the peripheral hospitals did not have. We were all MBBS people. This DMO came and visited, and she gave a certificate saying that this doctor and this hospital is qualified to do, say, tubectomies. That is how he taught us. And then he himself, he was a surgeon. Twice a week he'll be operating. So second day will be on Thursdays. At the end of the whole day operating, and he'll come out at about 2 o'clock, finish that day. And he will go to the field. To the one estate he will visit at that time. And he'll call, there used to be these 16 mm projectors at that time. And he'll said this will all be set up by about 6:30. It will be ready. No stage or anything outside in the fields. And then the workers will come and listen to what he's saying and see the movies, health movies he will be showing on water supplies and how diseases are spread and things like that. And nicely he will explain to them in Tamil, and he'll say things like to boil the water and then only drink, because he'll say, see, suppose I put you in a big pot and boil you, you'll die, won't you? Then they'll say, Sami, well, then you'll all die if you do that. So he's telling about the bacteria or whatever it is, disease-causing organism will be killed by boiling the water. And he taught them to drink only boiled water. Now also, if you go to the Munnar plantation workers' quarters and all that, you will find one big this thing of water, boiling water covered and kept. They all drink. Because of that, our waterborne illnesses have come down fantastically. When I got there, it was say about 60% or 70% of the OP was waterborne illnesses, along with typhoid, cholera, all that included. So that was the place that I went to, and to me, this Mahadevan is God. There's another God coming, just now we'll stick to Dr. Mahadevan, and he will not. I remember she has. Judith has said about one elephant goring a person, and then how with surgery they, he was survived and all that. So similar thing has happened in Dr. Mahadevan's time. That I remember, and his three ribs were broken, and we could see the heart beating inside. And Mahadevan worked the surgery for about 6-7 hours, and the man survived. So this sort of thing, people are scared to do anything like that. If he doesn't do it, that man is dead, isn't it? And even if you don't have a gynecology degree, the estates are so far this thing spread out estates we have. And so woman is in labor and she delivers, and then the placenta also hasn't come out. It's bleeding. How does she come to the doctor, the estate hospital? Either by tractor or somebody, put her in a dolly sort of thing and bring her. At that time, the doctor sitting in that hospital has to do something about it. Whatever he knows, he has to. Otherwise, by the time the patient gets to the main hospital where the surgeon is there, gynecologist is there, patient is no more. So you quickly, even if the tractor is not available, you put the patient in the car and then take to the hospital. So it's a different setup, and that is how most of the rural areas of India is even now, I would say. Then about the dispersal of this thing. So wherever you are, see, people and places throw up the problems that they have. You just have to have the heart to listen to those problems, and then you can act on them. So, but if you do not listen, if you have no time for them, they will want to talk to you. But if you don't have time, do not have time to speak to them, listen to them, you will not understand their problem, and the problem will remain. With a little persuasion and being a little nice to them. One lady said, Amma is very good. Tottu patra. She's touching. So these little things, that humane things, that is a thing. Margaret has done all that. She may not be a doctor, but so much she has done, which a normal doctor will not do in such circumstances. But still, I think Upasi was the very good time for me to broaden my horizons, and we gave one very important thing was we did while I was in Upasi was we made out an annual assessment system for estates. Assessment means we call it welfare audit. So there is no rupees and a spice in the welfare audit. You don't sit in an office and then check registers and give marks. It's not like that. We made a format, and it will be points are given. Total out of 100 points, we give for the things like, say, preventable diseases. Number of preventable diseases per 1,000 workers. things like that. And if you find polio vaccine sitting in the freezer of the hospital, you give minus marks. If there is an infant death, 0.2 marks are deducted. And if there is a maternal death, 5 points are deducted. So this sort of, that is a kind of audit that we have been doing. Initially, while I was with Tupasi, 3 estates, CWS, Malayalam, Harrison's Malayalam, and Tatati were doing this audit. And then for so many years, I've been doing it. And everybody else had dropped off except Tatati, which is, except during this Corona times where we were all tied down to our homes. And so these 2 years I haven't done it. The former team, I go as the external auditor, and IRD, Industrial Relations Manager will be there, and one doctor from the district, from High Range itself. That is how it was. It was being done, and I think it's a very good thing. There is the rolling trophy for the estate, the manager who gets the maximum marks, then for the doctor, for the hospital and all that, and also to the welfare officer. This is a major thing that in my mind, it's a very major thing that we did. Now we'll go to the olden days when these estates were opened up. That is what we have been listening to just now. Terrible times we all went through, and including that Muniandi and all that. Muniandi, I know Muniandi actually. I have in Munnar, wherever I have been also, Muniandi has been there. But there was worse than Muniandi, one fellow was there called Naimaru, he's called. Okay, so, and first when I got to Arivikad, Arivikad assistant Uni was, so in that bungalow, I was told that there is one Missy, it's a small white girl with golden locks, and she will be sitting in front of the mantelpiece where the fire is burning, and she'll be sitting and sitting or sometimes lying down and reading some book. 3, 4, 5 years and all she is supposed to be. I haven't seen her. Then I was told she doesn't like babies at all. So you may not have babies if you live in this bungalow. And sure enough, the 10th month I had my son. So that is about the Missy. I like that captain's thing. Captain who goes around with, what does he go around with? Shotgun or I don't know, whatever it is. So that is very good. Now, I believe that working in an industrial setting, every department has to contribute towards the production of whatever is being produced. That is why this plantation doctor has to be different. The prime object of medical department by keeping people in is keeping people in optimal health. Engineering department must assure that the factory machinery is kept in good condition, so on and so forth. The doctor has to learn to speak the language of productivity. Otherwise, people will not listen to you. You will be able to cause, say, typhoid has come, waterborne illnesses are there, typhoid. So what I used to do is, I will cost it. Patient was in my hospital for, say, 10 days. So how much is the productivity that you have lost? About how much is the medicine cost? So these things, we also have to start talking the language of the management, because we're working in a place where something is being produced, and then that is the prime thing of that company. It's not a specialist hospital, but so managers will not understand unless you talk their language too about productivity and all that. I've been able to do some studies and all that. Historically, health and welfare services evolved on the plantations as part of the overall development of the industry. That is how that happened. Because in Munnar, I have heard that as in those days, apothecary, she has written about apothecary coming and giving quinine tablets to the hospitals. So Munnar also, this system was there. Sometimes once a month only he'll come. And then he'll make a lot of these mixtures, you know, red mixture, gray mixture, yellow mixture and all that. He will make all those mixtures and he will go. He'll come only next month. So the assistant manager is supposed to go with Dr. Short's Medicine, it is called. It's a book. So the doctor goes, the assistant manager goes there. Every day he only goes. Maybe there is so he will keep giving all these things. Today, okay, red one, the next time, carbonative mixture, whatever. Assistant may not know the name of the mixture. So this is how I believe they were doing. Just going, assistants going around. After that, at that point of time, you know, people like Margaret would have been really, you know, worshipped there. So that is a thing. But anyway, health and welfare services evolved on the plantations as part of the overall development of the industry. And we see three phases. Labor was not available locally. You know, at that time when they started planting, local labor was just not there. They came from Tamil Nadu, if it is in Munnar. If it is in Assam, I've done a little bit work on Assam and Duas also while we were in Calcutta. Labor is not there, and they were brought from Tamil Nadu. And three phases in the provision of what we call employee welfare. The first phase, the employer, the man on the spot, doing the thinking. For the initial operations of clearing and land, etc., only men were hired first initially when they started, because women was not required. Then they were put up in large sheds. Only the men came, they were sleeping in, and this malaria, all those things are there. And afterwards, fever-haunted hills and frequently ran away because of this. They were very uncomfortable there and all these diseases and all. So we ran away. And then somebody has to go and then search for them in the village and then bring them back and all that. And then what was the solution? Solution was to bring the family also here, so that the wife and children will come and stay with this man, and then she could start plucking. She could go for plucking. And then what happened? She could not go for plucking when she had a child, a baby, somebody else has to look after. So creches were provided. And row houses built for them, for the families to stay. Initially it was just a shed, then it became row houses for different families. And the way we have put. Then creches means, again, you have to put some old lady in charge of these kids. Mother is normally given a nearer field to pluck, and she'll come at about 10 o'clock or something, she'll come and feed the baby. All those things used to happen. Now in the second phase, what see, places and people, and they throw up their own problems. And if you listen to them, you know what are the problems. And if you want to make tea, if you want to make any profit, you have to attend to that problem, isn't it? That much is sure. Then second phase, what happened? Whatever these people did, the original planters did in their wisdom, came as legislations. Plantation Labor Act came. 1951, Plantation Labor Act, and then Plantation Labor Rules, and modified in 1961, I think, I'm not very sure of that. And setting up of the machinery to implement them. So people were content to do this, but they were not doing their own thinking. That should not be. So, and Plantation Labor Act was done on the basis of whatever the old planters in their wisdom had been doing on the plantations. And then the third stage, what happened? Side by side, active trade union movement also developed. So did the concept of collective bargaining. The employer was more or less passive, content to fulfill the letter of the law, or wriggle out where possible. And then the third stage now has come. I hope it has come in the other plantations also. Realization by enlightened employers, that an industrial sector where 60% of the budget expenditure is on labor, investment in the health and welfare of the worker population, was sound management technique, to say the least. Investment in the health and welfare of the worker population is a sound management practice, to say the least. To how the multipliers went back, no? Factors that compelled them to go were stagnant productivity of land and labor in a labor operation, rising wages that accounts for over 60% of the production cost, 60% of the production cost, demonetization of the only fact, the vicious cycle is to increase productivity per man day. That is what I learned while working with some of the syllabi at that time, so the meetings. So there's nothing much to say. Yeah, but Madhavan, no, I was telling you one more god is coming. That is Krishna Kumar, who was, while I was working, he was a MD of our company, Tata Tea. And now he is Tata Trust chairman or whatever. He's very. So I've never seen anybody like him. You know, particularly if you submit a thing saying that this much is required, this amount, the water supplies are very bad here, and you give a proper this thing, asking for sanction of money. So once I remember, I asked for quite a lot of money, 7 lakh or something. But I had written it out properly. And then, so while I entered the room, he was sitting and looking and reading my report. And then only thing he asked me, I was so scared. I thought it will never come through. So he just asked me, Sulochana, do you think these people will benefit from this? So I said, sir, I may not be here. I may have retired and gone away. You may not be here also. But after 5 years, 6 years hence, certainly they will benefit. It is for a fresh water supply on an estate called Navra Nadi in the Dwas. So it is very polluted water that you are getting. You know, it's very marshy between two river thing. Navra Nadi, it is a river, and it's forking and going. And I don't know whether any of you have been to in the Dwas place. So it was full of malaria, large spleens, large rivers. And so I wrote in my report, what productivity can you expect from these people? They're all pale, absolutely no blood in them. So what productivity are you expecting from them? So that is Krishna Kumar. Whatever if you feel that it is a genuine need of the people, he will certainly sanction. So Mahadevan's just one more story and then I'll stop. Mahadevan, after he retired and settled in Chennai, even after 10 years and all that, he will write to the estate doctor letters. He'll say, I had operated, I had done GJ to someone Kandasamy in so-and-so division, so-and-so estate. I would like to know how he is. How is he? No, he had taken, what is it? Retirement, no, medical retirement, saying that he's not well. But Mahadevan had already operated and then he should be okay. Then when the letter comes, the doctor in the estate doesn't even know where this man is. He could have retired and gone. He's somewhere in Sirivallikuttur or some wherever he's coming from. So sometimes you feel, my gosh, this man doesn't forget whatever work he has done and then he remembers the patient's name and must be keeping a diary like Margaret. So, and then he'll write a letter like this. So I remember once, that patient's name was Kandasamy. And so I sent word into the division saying that Kandasamy's family will be there, sons, and I sent word and then said, your Sami, they used to call him Periyasamy. Periyasamy has written a letter like this, he would like to know how you are. And then after some time, there was nothing, we never heard about him at all. And say after 15, 16 days, Kandasamy comes to the OP. He's standing there, he's taking out his turban and standing like that. And then he said, now, Periyavare poi paathitte. He has gone to Madras and met Dr. Mahadevan. And then after that, he's coming and telling me, I was very happy. He was very happy to see me. And now, Valibanatam Velashede. Valibanatam means as a young, like a young man, I've been working now after that operation. So just imagine somebody, some doctor like that, Don't you want to follow in his footsteps? How much love he had for all these people. He'll scream at them also. You're a liar, you're a liar, all that he'll say, but they loved him. And he was always Periyasamy to them. What more can I say? Thank you so much for giving me a hearing like this. Thank you.
Dr. Sulochana, that was really wonderful to see perspectives from a medical point of view. We had not really realized about that at all. Fascinating to hear your stories, ma'am. And thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts and your perspectives with us. Arya, I'll give it to you if you would like to just share the observations, or anyone would like to comment or ask any questions to both our speakers, Judy and Dr. Sulochana. Arya, can you unmute Dr. Judy also, Judy also, so that they can also respond back? Arya, over to you.
Thank you so much. We will start with a few questions that have already come up. So this is a question from a viewer on YouTube. He asks, since Judith's grandfather worked in Pallivasal, Pamba, highways, etc., was he joining different companies every few years?
I don't have that kind of information, but I do know that they moved a lot from different. I think they moved 3 times while they were up in Munnar, from Pallivasal and the other plantation estate that I mentioned. I can't really answer that question from her memoir.
Actually, initially when the plantations were opened out, that time, you read about Monroe and Turner brothers and all that who came to Munnar, and superintendent of the Cardamom Hills. He came, and Henry Gribble Turner and Thambi Turner. Thambi means younger brother. Younger brother also came. And so that time, once the Punyar, from the Punyar Raja, the land was leased out to Turner and I don't know who else, someone who came from Madras also. He was an ICS man. So at that point of time, they just bought some land planting agricultural society, something society was formed. And individuals came and bought little plots, little areas. And it was not a company in the beginning. And it was just coming up. Why did this happen? Why was tea planted in India? It is because William Bentinck was the Governor General, and Britain had a treaty with China for tea. So that was expiring in 1832. Before that, William Bentinck wanted to grow tea and cultivate tea in all their colonies. That is how Ceylon has, Africa has, Kenya there is tea. So all over, all the colonies had, Bangladesh had, Ceylon had. So that is how, by 1832, afterwards the treaty was not, they didn't renew the treaty. That is why these tea estates came. So it was all done in different places, and people from Tamil Nadu coming, for Assam people from, actually Telugu people, Andhra Pradesh people have gone, and they got, they got some Chinese also to come and work to start up the tea estates. Munnar had one Chinaman actually. I've seen Chinaman's plot, we call it, one area where. So that is how tea came into being in India. Pardon? Huh? Okay.
Thank you. There are a lot of comments that we will share with all of you. But a lot of people also want to know, Judy, if your book is expected anytime soon and if it will be available on an online platform and what the title of the book might be.
It's with the book is with the printers at the moment. I'm working on a self-publishing, so I'm designing and having to arrange all the pages myself. I'm just doing the cover probably next week. So hopefully it should be out before Christmas. I haven't got any plans at the moment for an online, but that would be the next stage. Once it's published as a book, then I will be looking at releasing it online as well.
Thank you so much. The floor is now open for anybody who wishes to ask a question. Please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask the question. We have a few minutes that we can take a few questions.
This is Tara here, and since I read the your grandmother's diaries when you sent it,
Mm-hmm.
I wish you had she must have taken photographs of the elephants and other animals there, which she describes beautifully in
Yes.
the book. Are there any photographs that you can show?
Cara, that is something that has really amazed me, that she has photographs, so many photographs of people, children, all of the plantations, the development of the planting, the clearing of the land. I've got so many, even aerial photographs, but not one of an animal. And that really has always, I'm glad you asked that question because I have no answer to it. And I really don't know why she didn't. Very strange. Because as you say, the descriptions are so vivid.
The descriptions are just unbelievable. And
yes.
I mean, we hear so much nowadays of elephants crossing from one place to another. And he also talks about, such problems then. So I felt many of us could relate to, those, what she saw and wrote about. Thank you.
Yes. I think, Tara, can I just come back to you a moment? Tara?
Yeah, yes, Judy.
What I was going to say was that actually, while I don't know if I mentioned it while I was talking, but when they were, while she was in India, she actually catalogued and recorded more than 250 species of plants and tree, and then as well as lots of grasses, and she also catalogued all the animals that she'd seen. So fortunately, we never found her original diary. Nobody knows what happened to that. But I think, I have more research myself to do on this. It interests me a lot. And I want to get in touch with some of the places that she sent the specimens to, and also the information about them. So yeah, I'll go further with that.
I think you have a good audience here who are all probably from Myanmar and places that she stayed, and maybe help you if you tell them where she had sent her specimens to be identified.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good.
Judy, so do you have a title yet for the book or not?
Yes, I have. Well, I might change it. I haven't actually designed the covers, so I'm not tied to anything. But I think I'm going to keep it very simple and just have a picture of her on the front and some photographs on the back. And then it's going to be the luckiest of women, my 40 years in India. It's from a quote in the book. But if anybody else has ideas and suggestions, I'm very open.
Sounds good. So, Lochna, I was just wondering, your book on Munnar, you said will be in print soon? Oh, okay.
The story of Munnar is called.
Yeah, okay.
Nice.
It's not available now, right?
Hopefully, September, October, and all, it will come out, I suppose. Actually,
Okay.
the company is printing it. PLANTATIONS is printing it, and KDHP is printing it for me.
Okay.
Judy, I think some people would like to get in touch with you. If you could share your email ID, maybe just type it into the chat box. You might get a lot of feedback coming from people who have also lived in the estates and would like to share some thoughts with you.
Okay.
And also know how they can get their hands on your book once it is published.
Okay. So I'll put my email in here.
In the chat box, please.
Okay, it's in the chat box now. Oh, I'm not sure how to send it in the chat box.
You just have to press return.
Press return. Okay, that's it.
Don't see anything yet.
Oh, it's come up on my screen. It says direct message underneath.
No, then you've sent it to just one person.
Just select everyone. You have to select everyone and then press send chat to everyone. There is an option.
Not on my machine, it's not.
Oh, would you like to spell it for us? I could put it up on the chat box.
Okay, thank you. It's Judy
Okay.
GOMME@gmail.com.
Okay.
Okay. This has been a challenge, all the technical bits, a real challenge. Yes, and as far as the getting in touch about the book being published, maybe I could send a message to you at Intacc and
Sure, we'll try to pass the word around.
yes.
So thanks to both of you. And can we, if there are no more questions, Arya and Shama, is there anything else? We can ask Divakar to give the vote of thanks. Are there any more questions?
I don't think there are any more questions. I think we can go ahead. Can
we request Divakar to?
I'd just like to read out one message that has come, which might interest Judy, from Anil Matthew. Books to have photographs of development stages of the various plantations where your grandmother lived. That would be a great pleasure for all in plantations.
I'm not hearing you, Tara. You're breaking up.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't hear any of that.
It just says, Tara, if I might take over, it says, hope your books will have photographs of the developmental stages of the various plantations where your grandmother lived. That would be a great treasure for all in plantations. Well, photographs of the development stages of the various plantations.
Yeah, the book I probably won't be able to, but if anybody would like me to send them, I'm very happy to send photographs to anybody. I've got a lot of photographs and I could do that easily. But I'm afraid I'm limited to photographs in the book. But I'm certainly happy to send them if anybody would like them.
I think there's one more comment which says, Kay, thank you so much for the detailed presentation. It really took me on a nostalgic journey. This is from Uma Balu. Do you have any pictures of or information on the estates of Wayanad, especially Makdara Mahal? Because
No.
Gandhiji had visited Wayanad. Are there any details or pictures available on that?
No, I'm afraid that that estate didn't come up at all in their time.
At that time. Okay.
Yeah, I'm afraid not. Sorry about that.
And I think one more question, have there been also interventions in mental health for estate workers? This is probably to Dr. Sulochana. Interventions in mental health for estate workers.
My grandmother talked about, oh, sorry, yeah, I beg your
No,
pardon.
please
No,
go
no,
ahead.
no.
Good evening. Can I come in?
Yes, please, Mr. Rajesh. Carry on.
Good evening. My question is actually to Judy. But before that, I would just like to say hello to Sulu Auntie. I'm Jyoti and Rani's son from old Annamalai days. And I was one of the auditees of your welfare audit when I was a manager in Munnar. And coincidentally, like just before going to the interview in Munnar, actually, I dropped into your house to meet you and uncle for a brief period that evening. Yes. I just would like to ask Judy, like, how did you stumble onto this manuscript after all these years?
Well, it was one of the, in families, there are myths and you carry stories through. And it was carried through that my grandmother had a diary and written. And it wasn't until she came back, I was actually living in London at the time, and she came back from India and went to live with my parents, well, near my parents in Dollar. And at that time, she had it on imperial paper, which couldn't be published, or couldn't be printed to be published. So she asked me if I would take the imperial and get it typed up again on A4 with more conventional print. So that's when I became aware of it. But then you know how life just takes over, and I traveled and I got married and I had children and I went to university, and all those things get in the way. And it wasn't until later that I wanted to reread it. And then, of course, I was totally fascinated by it. And I found just such a remarkable story that I decided that I would then take it and edit it. There was a lot of editing to do, although we didn't change her story at all. We had to, it was very muddled because it wasn't really sequential. We had to try and work out where she went in stages and the sort of thing she was doing in those stages. It was all in chapters to beginning, and now it's in sections, and so it's much easier to read. But yeah, it's been a lovely process. I've really, really enjoyed it. I'm getting to know her and learning about India too, and learning and researching all the places where they lived. And I've learned so much. I would start writing something and then suddenly get sidetracked because I was researching a place or the animals or a plant or something. So I've learned a lot about India too. Although I was born there, I don't really remember anything.
Thank you, and best wishes to both of you.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you.
Thank you.
Mr. Divakar, if you could like to propose.
Sujata just wanted to share a word before I started. I
Okay,
think
but I
Sujata
think
needs to be unmuted. Yeah, right.
she's muted.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say a word of thanks to Mr. Ooman Abraham, who I think is here today with us. Just wanted to say thanks for, connecting us to Mr. Sulochana and making this event happen. Thank you so much. And thank you, Sulochana and Judy. I'll let Divakar formally thank both of you.
Thank you, Sujata.
Thanks, Judith Watson, for such a loosey recount of the life on the tea plantations based on your grandmother's diaries. We usually associate plantation life with comfortable, luxurious living. However, we learned from Margaret Cantill's diaries that it was hardly so. Right from food shortage to onslaught of malaria to enduring world's highest rainfall of 60 inches in 48 hours, it was a struggle to get the factory up and going. Overcoming challenges, Margaret and James spent a memorable 4 decades before bidding goodbye. Judy transported us to that era with an engrossing recount. Thanks also to Sulochana Nalapat Unikrishnan for sharing her memories of 3 decades in tea estates. Sulochana reminisced on the cultural differences she experienced after her wedding, having come from a Gandhian teetotaler family. She also shared the experience of a medical officer in Munnar, where they were expected to handle every kind of medical emergency. She also shared invaluable points on the importance of personnel management, which she learned from her time in the plantations. Thank you, Sulochana, for such a fantastic presentation. Thank you, Shama, for anchoring this meeting efficiently. Our thanks are also to the guests who joined this interesting session. Thank you. Have a nice time. Good night.